Okay, so today we're diving into, well, it's a tough one, the Tak Bai incident. Back on October 25th, 2004, a protest in southern Thailand. Well, it turned into a violent clash with security forces, and tragically, 85 Muslim protesters died. This deep dive is especially relevant now because, well, the 20th anniversary is coming up. And also with that, the statute of limitations runs out, meaning no one can be prosecuted for those deaths.
Yeah, that's a really important point.
Yeah.
The timing of this, it adds another layer
Yeah.
to an already super sensitive issue. It really makes you think about justice delayed, justice denied, and what happens when you just run out of time to hold people accountable legally.
Exactly. So we're going to unpack exactly what went down at Tak Bai, look at what happened afterward, and try to understand why were there no convictions? And of course, we have to look at the political situation now as we get closer to this anniversary. We've got a lot of different sources to help us understand this. We've got Thai news reports, international coverage, legal opinions, and even some social media posts to get a feel for what people are saying, how they're remembering it.
Having that range of perspectives is so important, especially with something as complex and, sensitive as this. It helps us get a fuller picture.
Yeah.
Seeing all the different sides and how people interpret what happened.
Right. So let's start by laying out a timeline of what happened. What was it that sparked the protest in the first place?
Well, it started with the arrest of these 6 village defense volunteers. They were suspected of helping insurgents, and this really set off the local community. They felt like it was totally unjust.
And then things escalated pretty quickly from there.
Oh, yeah. Hundreds of people gathered at the Tak Bai police station to protest the arrests. And that led to this huge crackdown by the government, mass detentions, and that's when things went really, really bad.
This is the part that's just so hard to wrap your head around. Tell us about what happened when they transported the detainees.
That's the toughest part of the whole thing to think about. The people who were detained, they were tied up and piled onto these army trucks for a journey that was over 100 miles long. They were packed in so tight the conditions were just awful. And in the end, 78 of them died from suffocation. And another 7 were shot and killed.
I can't even imagine. It's no wonder that people are so outraged and demanding justice.
Absolutely. The brutality of what happened and then no one being held responsible.
Yeah.
It's created this deep anger and distrust, especially towards the government and the security forces.
Which leads us to the second part of what we want to look at today, the fact that there's been no justice. They tried to prosecute some of the security personnel involved, but no one has been convicted.
Yeah, and that just adds to the trauma for the families of the victims, for the whole community. It feels like the people in power can just do whatever they want with no consequences, especially in places where there's already so much tension.
Back in August, some of the families filed a lawsuit against 7 officials, including a retired general and even a lawmaker from the ruling party. But they didn't even show up in court.
Yeah, that just shows you the power dynamics at play, how hard it is to hold the powerful accountable, especially when it comes to human rights.
And then just last month, another case against 8 personnel fell apart. It was filed by the Attorney General, but it went nowhere.
It makes you wonder, if the legal system won't deliver justice, what options do the families have? Where can they turn for closure or to see someone held responsible?
And on top of all that, Thai police are going after 14 suspects. They've got Interpol red notices out for them, but with the statute of limitations about to expire, it feels like a race against time, and maybe it's already too late.
That expiring statute of limitations adds to the pressure, but it also shows the limitations of the law, especially when it comes to dealing with past injustices, especially when it involves the actions of the state.
With the anniversary getting closer, the whole situation is so tense. Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra has apologized publicly, offering condolences on behalf of the government and saying they'll try to prevent this from ever happening again.
It's a big step for her to take, but it's also happening so close to the anniversary. And when the legal options are running out, it makes you question if it's truly coming from the heart or if it's a political move given how sensitive this event is.
It's a tough spot for her, especially since this happened when her father, Thaksin Shinawatra, was in charge, and he's a major figure in her few Thai party, so that connection is always there.
Yeah, it definitely casts a shadow over her time as prime minister. And it adds another layer of complexity to her apology and how the government is responding.
She's also said that they've given money to the victims' families, but a lot of people feel like that's not enough. And she's been clear that she can't extend the statute of limitations because of the Constitution.
That statement about the statute of limitations really shows how limited the legal system can be, and how sometimes it actually prevents justice from happening. It also shows that tension between wanting to hold people accountable and the reality of politics and the law.
This has definitely been a situation where people have strong feelings and different opinions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of debate about how to deal with this tragedy. A lawyer who represents the victims' families, Ratsada Manor Atsada, he talked about how even though the case might be over legally, the memories and the pain are still there.
And on the other side, you've got people like General Paithan Nusan. He's the commander of the 4th Army Region, and he's calling for everyone to come together and focus on preventing this kind of thing from happening again. Sounds like he wants to just move on, but for a lot of people, that's not possible without someone being held responsible.
It makes sense that he would want to see unity, especially with the insurgency still going on. But it's dangerous to just ignore injustice in the name of peace. I think true reconciliation needs a much deeper, more thoughtful approach.
And in the middle of all this, the Thai Muslim community and activists are doing something really powerful. They're organizing a cycling campaign to retrace the victims' final journey.
It's such a moving tribute. It's a way for the community to honor the victims and keep their memory alive, especially as the legal options are disappearing.
It's so complicated, it really strikes me how this Tak Bai incident is connected to the bigger picture of the insurgency in South Thailand.
Yeah, you're right on the money. Tak Bai wasn't just an isolated event. It was a terrible outcome of these deep tensions that have been building in the region for decades. You've got ethnic and religious differences, socioeconomic grievances, and a history of political marginalization. It's all mixed up together.
It's a lot to try to understand, let alone find a solution for.
It really is. There's so many different groups involved, loyalty shifting all the time, and a long history of violence and distrust on everyone's side. Finding a lasting peace can't just be about military solutions. You have to address the root causes. People feeling left out, lack of opportunity, the feeling that the government doesn't care about them.
One of the things we read mentioned a parliamentary committee focused on peace in the South. Chacharan Chaisang, a member of parliament. He's been talking about the need for accountability and learning from the mistakes of the past. He even brought up something really worrying. The possibility of security forces intimidating people who filed lawsuits related to Tak Bai, trying to silence them.
If that's true, it's really disturbing. It suggests that they're trying to bury the truth and prevent justice from being served. That just deepens the distrust between the community and those in authority.
It sounds like even within the government, there's a realization that Tak Bai was a turning point, making the insurgency worse and driving people further apart.
It was a tragedy that made the existing divisions even deeper and created new ones. The scars from that day run deep, and the wounds from the past are still preventing any real reconciliation.
Which brings us back to the issue of justice and reconciliation. It feels impossible to untangle, no easy answers.
You've got it. Trying to achieve both justice and reconciliation in places with such deep conflict is incredibly tough. They're connected, but sometimes going after one can make the other harder to reach.
And now with the statute of limitations running out, it feels like a door to justice is slamming shut on the families of the victims.
Yeah, it can feel like a final blow, like they're being denied their right to see those responsible held accountable. That lack of closure can have a huge impact on people, psychologically and socially. It can lead to resentment, anger, and could even fuel more violence.
It also raises serious questions about how committed Thailand is to human rights and the rule of law. And that affects how they're seen by the rest of the world.
These kinds of incidents have consequences that go far beyond national borders. They make people doubt a country's commitment to human rights, and it can damage their reputation in the international community.
So what can be done? The Prime Minister apologized, which is a good step, but it feels like a small one given the scale of what happened.
Apologies are important, but they're just a start. Real healing and reconciliation take a lot more, a much bigger effort over a longer time.
So what else is needed? How do we even begin to fix this historical wrong, especially now that the legal options are gone?
That's a tough question, and there's not a simple answer. But I think it starts with admitting the truth of what happened, being willing to face the uncomfortable facts about the past, and creating opportunities for honest and open dialogue.
You mean like a truth and reconciliation process, like what South Africa did after apartheid?
Exactly. It's about giving victims a chance to tell their stories, for the people who did wrong to admit what they did, and for society as a whole to confront the painful truths of its history.
But is reconciliation even possible without justice? There's so much anger and resentment. It feels like the government just wants to sweep this under the rug and forget about it. It's a real worry, right? Truth and reconciliation reconciliation can sound pretty hollow if it's not backed up by real action. Actually dealing with the things that caused the conflict in the first place and holding people accountable, even if it's not through the usual legal channels.
Yeah, I agree with that. You need a whole range of approaches, not just symbolic gestures. You have to tackle the deep-rooted issues, the inequality, the social and economic injustice. The breakdown of trust between communities and the state, that's what fuels these conflicts.
So what would that look like in South Thailand specifically? What concrete things could they do?
Well, like we were saying, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission could be a start. But it has to be done right. The government has to really commit to creating a space where people feel safe to tell the truth and where there's a genuine chance for healing. They could also look at things like reparations for the families who lost loved ones, publicly acknowledging what went wrong, and educational programs to teach future generations about the conflict.
Those sound like good ideas, but I wonder if the government would be willing to go that far. This whole event is so politically charged.
It would take a lot of courage. They'd have to put reconciliation ahead of politics. But it could also be a chance for them to show the world that they're serious about human rights and that they're ready to deal with past injustices in a meaningful way.
And what about those 14 suspects with the Interpol red notices? The statute of limitations is almost up. Does that mean they're in the clear?
Legally, it's unlikely they'll face charges in Thailand. But those red notices could still affect them. They might not be able to travel to other countries. They could even face legal problems elsewhere. It shows that even though things might be over legally in one country, there can still be international pressure.
So there's still a chance, even if it's small, that they might be held accountable outside of Thailand. It's not much, but it's something. It feels like a really frustrating and sad situation, but even though the legal clock is running out, maybe it's not the absolute end of the road for getting some kind of justice.
Yeah, I think that's right. It shows that we need to be creative and persistent in finding ways to hold people accountable and to keep fighting for the rights of the victims and their families. It also raises important questions about how well our legal systems work, especially when dealing with things that happened in the past, and with systemic injustice.
So if we step back and look at the bigger picture, what are the key takeaways for our listeners? What have we learned from this deep dive into Tak Bai?
I think, first of all, it shows how devastating conflict can be, especially in places where there's a long history of grievances and where power is so unevenly distributed. Events like this leave deep scars, they erode trust, and make it so hard to reconcile.
And it highlights how important it is to deal with the root causes of these conflicts, not just the symptoms. It's not enough to just focus on peace treaties and ceasefires. We have to address things like inequality, marginalization, lack of opportunity. Those are the things that fuel these conflicts to begin with.
Exactly. And second, the fact that no one has been held legally accountable in this case. It's a harsh reminder that justice can be really hard to come by, especially for communities that are already marginalized. And when the people involved are in positions of power, we need to think outside the box, look for other ways to achieve truth, reconciliation, and healing.
It makes me think about other conflicts around the world where we see similar problems. Are there any examples of truth and reconciliation processes that worked, that Thailand could learn from?
There are definitely some good examples out there. The South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, even though it had its flaws. It shows how you can balance the need for accountability with the desire for healing and unity. Other countries like Rwanda, Timor-Leste, and Guatemala have tried different things too. Thailand can look at those for inspiration.
It seems like there's no one solution that will work everywhere. But looking at how other societies have dealt with their own difficult pasts, that can give us valuable insights and ideas for the future. This has been a heavy topic, but really important. The Tak Bai massacre is a stark reminder of how fragile peace can be, and the long-lasting effects of violence and injustice. It's a story that needs to be told, that needs to be remembered. And I hope this encourages our listeners to keep learning about this complex issue, and to look for more information about the insurgency in South Thailand and the impact it's had on people's lives.
I agree. As we wrap up, I'd like to leave you with a question to think about. What happens to a society when the legal time limit for justice runs out? How can we make sure that people are held accountable for the wrongs of the past, even when we face these kinds of challenges? And maybe even more important, what can we do to prevent tragedies like this from happening again? These are questions that we need to keep thinking about, keep discussing.